The Port of Houston is big. So big, it handles 73% of all container traffic for the Gulf Coast, 97% of containers for the state of Texas, and depending on how you're measuring, it's the fifth largest port in the country in terms of overall traffic. Despite this, the port is getting bigger. Project 11, the 11th expansion of the port, is currently underway. This expansion, widening the channel from 530 to 700 feet, is ongoing and a major new consideration in how we think about the port and the channel in Houston. I'm Weston Twardowski, an instructor in Rice University's Environmental Studies program and the program manager of the Diluvial Houston Initiative, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. Today on Gulf Streams, we're speaking with Leticia Guiterrez, the Government Relations and Community Outreach Director of Air Alliance Houston, Erandi Trevino, an organizer at Public Citizen, and Allyn West, a Senior Communications Manager at the Environmental Defense Fund. All have been thinking and advocating to raise awareness of concerns around the port, its expansion, and its impacts on local communities. Leticia, Erandi, Allyn, thank you so much for joining us. So just to start us off, all three of you are from organizations that are part of a group called One Breath Partnership. Can you just tell us what One Breath is and what it's been working on around Project 11?
So One Breath is led by EDF, which is the Environmental Defense Fund, along with Air Alliance Houston, which is the organization that I work for, along with Public Citizen. And so together, One Breath, a lot of what they do is journalistic type of work, and, we help them bridge that gap to, provide storytelling and also report on what's going on the ground in regards to not just necessarily regarding the port, but anything environmentally unfriendly in our communities.
Great, thank you. So jumping right into Project 11, can you tell us a little bit about why this is coming about, what's going on with it, and what the concerns related to it are?
Sure. I want to also start off by saying, my name is Leticia Guiterrez, and I'm the Government Relations Director, Community Outreach Director, as well as a Community Outreach Director for Air Alliance Houston, that is a part of the Healthy Ports Community Coalition as well. So it's a coalition that partners up with One Breath. And so we do have some partners in the Healthy Ports Community Coalition that also work towards a lot of what we're doing today. We have Naomi Yoder, who is with Healthy Gulf, and then we have the Bayou City Waterkeeper. We also have, obviously, Public Citizens, and then we have Reverend Caldwell with COCO. So we have a few other organizations that also make up the work that we're doing. So, a lot of what we do is community-based, what we consider community-based science. We listen to community concerns around, of course, our organization is more based in regards to air quality issues, but as it pertains to the port right now, regarding the Project 11, we have some serious concerns around the dredging, and more importantly, not just the pollution that's going to come from the dredging itself, but where the Army Corps of Engineers and the Port of Houston are wanting to put the dredge spoils, which currently those spots are Galena Park and Pleasantville, which are communities that have already been burdened with a lot of the expansions in the past with the port, along with, water contamination, air contamination. So we have some serious concerns. And to your point, it is one of the largest ports in the country. And if not the world, we're also considered the energy capital of the world. And the port has some serious responsibilities. So we know that they have been doing a fairly decent job in terms of engaging us, but unfortunately, we really haven't pushed the needle as far as we should have, considering the way not just our region, but our country is moving more and more towards, understanding what these air chemicals are doing to us, but what it has in terms of generational effects.
Great. All right. So, yes, this is a big
Sorry.
issue.
Yeah, I know.
It does involve a lot of partners.
Yes.
And a lot of different issues, right? Like, absolutely, you're talking about the port is a major employer in town. It's a major resource in town. People have a lot of different needs related to the port, and at the same time, it's impossible to ignore. It is a major air pollutant center. It is a major water pollution center. It is noise, light, all kinds of things we can think of. But let's hone in a little bit. I want to go back to one of the earlier things that you said, which was specifically about dredge piles. And so let's just maybe start with dredging is involved in expanding the port. What is dredging, and what are we worried about with it?
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Erandi Trevino. I'm an organizer with Public Citizen, and I help manage the Healthy Port Communities Coalition here in Houston. And so, yes, to your question, what is dredging? Because, so the Houston Ship Channel operates through dredging on a regular basis. They regularly dredge, which means that they essentially excavate material from the bottom and from the sides of the ship channel, and so that's called dredge material.
Yeah.
The things what they scoop out, and so they're consistently doing that because just through the operations, the channel wasn't always there. Right,
Yeah.
100 years ago, the ship channel was created, which is, it came from Galveston and was essentially dredged out through to the point where it is today.
Hey, all, can you hear me? This is Allyn West.
Yes.
Alan, did you want to jump in? Okay, sorry. Keep going, Erandi.
Yeah, sure thing. And so Project 11 is the 11th major expansion of the Houston Ship Channel, because the ship channel was created and then gradually it was made larger and larger to the size it is right now. And so right now, most recently, the Panama Canal was expanded. And due to that expansion, a lot of other channels around the country have felt the pressure to expand as well. Because with that expansion through the Panama Canal comes the potential and the possibility for larger ships and larger vessels to come through. And so the Houston Ship Channel also wants to have that capacity. So, fair enough. However, it does come with consequences. The expansion, which again, it requires dredging down and to the sides, would make it to where these larger vessels would fit through the channel. What this larger vessels means is going to be more contamination in our city, all throughout the city, really, because there's going to be more traffic related to the increased imports that are going to come with these larger vessels. So that's one thing. But also, dredging itself is a polluting activity. Dredging equipment is heavy machinery that uses diesel, and so that pollutes heavily into communities. However, there are cleaner and cleaner equipment that's becoming available as the technology advances. And so, what we're asking is, okay, you're already wanting to expand the channel that's underway. Do it in a way that's going to be least impactful on communities that are already hit hardest by pollution.
So this is part of what you're talking about with these ever-increasing ports, is this kind of arms race that's happening with shipping, where it's just, larger and larger vessels. And really, we're talking about kind of astronomically sized, massive vessels that are just not at all sustainable for natural port infrastructure, that keep requiring ports around the world to keep expanding. And so this issue of dredging is, I'm curious if you can talk about what are the concerns related to these bigger and bigger ships? What are these pollutants you're talking about directly with the port that are coming off that? And then I think we'll jump into some of the actual dredge waste, which is another concern. But just to start us off, the ships themselves, like what are the problems with these massive container ships? And I really can't stress enough how huge these things are. They're like small cities that are basically moving on the water.
Alan, do you want to jump in?
I think we may be having technical difficulties with Alan at the moment, so let's give it a moment and see if we can get him in.
Well, I guess I can go ahead and jump in as well. I feel that a lot of the work that we do and the outreach that we do with community, we try our best to not necessarily bombard them with. Yes, of course, we do speak to a lot of the diesel emissions and the NOx that come in part with a lot of these concerns that we're speaking of today. And so to your point, yes, there is a lot of ship traffic and container traffic. And so, about 4 years ago, pre-COVID, we took some of our elected officials and staff, including stakeholders, to the Port of LA and to the Port of Long Beach to see how, those ports there have actually been able to achieve zero emissions, and to, make it known that these things are possible for our communities as well. I got involved in this work almost 10 years ago because my son developed an upper respiratory issue, and then I saw an article out in the Chronicle regarding a study that UT Health had done about children living 2 miles or less near the port being 50 times more likely to get certain types of childhood leukemias. And so as a mother, that was very concerning. I just did a 180 on my career and delved into this work. And so I'm here today because of that. I am a product of the East End. My family and I live near the port. We experience a lot of the smells, a lot of the things that we're speaking of here. So it's not just a personal thing. It's also the way that our community is also responding to these issues. As I mentioned, more and more information. We have access to the internet these days where you can Google these chemicals. You can Google what particulate matter 2.5 is and what it does to your body. Most of us are able to expel it, but for those of us with, immunocompromised or small children, pregnant mothers, people with heart disease and all kinds of other health ailments, this is a huge concern. And so, again, this is why a lot of us do this work, is because I know that I consider Erandi a friend because we bond over these issues. She also is experiencing health issues and health concerns around the exact same things that we're fighting for right now. So it's personal to us, and we do what we can every single day. We rarely take any time off, which is unfortunate, to make sure that, again, we're pushing the needle where it should be, because we feel that the port is years behind the curve. And again, there's ways to do it. There's ways to mitigate. And unfortunately, I feel our lawmakers are, those that are empowered think that we should just keep doing it the way that we've been doing it for the last 50, 100 years, and that we're going to get different results. And that's not the case.
So, that's very clear on some of these immediate health impacts that you're seeing and feeling in these areas. I'm wondering, I think we have Allyn back on. I wonder if we can go over to Allyn and talk a little about some of the new impacts coming directly out of Project 11, some of this dredge material that's been mentioned. Allyn, can you hear us? Are you there?
I can hear you all. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. Welcome.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much for joining, and sorry about the tech glitches there.
I am too.
We've been talking a little about the health impacts and the port expansion in general. We did mention dredge material and what dredging is. I'm wondering if you can talk to us some about what's going on with this, dredge material, where it's going with it, because I know there's a whole set of concerns around where it's going. Can you walk us through some of that conversation?
Sure. Erandi and Leticia would be better than I to speak to this, but, essentially anytime you make a body of water wider or deeper, you have to, the word dredging is literal. In this case, you have to scoop the banks on the bottom, and then with all that sediment that you're creating, it needs to go somewhere. Right, and so for many, many years, Port of Houston has owned these huge patches of land in places like Pleasantville, in places like Galena Park, in places like the East End, which near where Leticia lives, off Old Galveston Road. And so these sites are essentially, they look like weird tall meadows, sort of these urban mesas that are just covered in grass and trees. They're not really marked. They're not fenced off. One of Leticia's colleagues has talked about, when he was a boy, he would sort of, play on them, right, riding his bikes through the mud.
And we're talking about sites that have just been where material's been dumped.
Correct.
Yeah,
where material has already been dumped.
Yeah, some of the sites have been decommissioned. The one in Pleasantville had a very famous breach in the 50s, I think, 1957, and
Correct.
Just blocks and blocks of this sort of toxic,
sludge.
Sludge.
Right.
Nobody really knew what was in it, but it was swamping cars and getting into people's houses. And so with Project 11, a lot of these decommissioned sites are being put back into place. The million cubic yards, something like that, of this muck. And you can see why folks, don't necessarily want to live next to a toxic mountain. But it's the question of what's exactly in those sites and how toxic they are and how things move and shift underground and what the flood risks would be. There's just an endless series of questions that I don't think the Army Corps of Engineers who's doing the work or Port Houston has really been able to answer to anyone's satisfaction.
Yeah, Leticia?
No, I was going to say he's absolutely correct. And to that point, we did have a community town hall meeting back in August with the Army Corps and the Port of Houston to talk about, the port was there to give a presentation on dredging, and community spoke up specifically around what Allyn just mentioned, the 1953 flood that happened in the Pleasantville community. The community has stepped forward and told their stories about either they themselves were in those floodwaters and they have had families, they themselves with cancer and other illnesses that they feel as directly related to the fact that they were in these very dangerous, poisonous waters. So, it's very hard to say exactly what is in the soil. We have done our own independent testing, but even then we can't really speak to that just yet because they're still preliminary. But even the preliminary results does have some serious concerns around some of the heavy metals, some of the carcinogens that, again, that we're speaking to. And so we shouldn't, as a nonprofit organization that have limited funding, this burden shouldn't be falling on us, the citizens, the community. These are things that, those that are supposed to be there to protect us should already be doing. So that is why, we do have some friendly folks inside the EPA, Dr. Earthia Nance, who is the Region 6 director for EPA. So, prior to the town hall meeting, we did have a EPA tour with, all said parties, Army Corps, Port of Houston, community leaders, those that stand to be affected by these concerns. And, we raised awareness. We're still in conversations around, again, the concerns themselves. Our next step at this point is to, go to our congressional leaders and really demand for a congressional hearing, because we just genuinely don't feel that at this point, given all of the concerns that we've raised, all of the, stories, talks, we're literally pointing and providing all of the needed proof, if you will, and the things that we're consistently asking for are not being delivered.
Well, let me ask, because you all are community members yourselves.
Correct.
You are, going to these meetings. What do you want? What is the community asking for? What are these, when you go to a meeting, what is coming up? What is being, vocalized by community members in terms of how this should be handled and what should be done in terms of the port's future?
No, absolutely. We want the Port of Houston to own its responsibility. First and foremost, there's ways to be able to put the current plan of where the dredge spoils are planning to be placed in Galena Park and Pleasantville to move them up further east away from community. There's also, having the chip channel require facilities to pay when they pollute, or also paying for independent, thorough air, soil, and water monitoring. And these results need to be available and enforceable to us, the community. Along with subsidizing some of the bridges and infrastructures needed to provide, underpasses. I know that you visited me a few times regarding or around our East End community, and trains are a huge issue. So again, we know that the port makes billions of dollars. There's a huge responsibility there. We pay into it as well. So again, these are just, in our opinion, some really low-hanging fruit that the port could really try to work on. And unfortunately, we're currently feeling as if it's just, let's meet, let's talk about the things, but not really moving the needle forward. They point to some very small, greenwashing type of efforts that they've made around, getting some extra electric cars or LED lighting. That's not going to help us in the long run. And community is consistently calling us, asking us, where are we? Where is the port? We see other ports across the country, and ours is still very antiquated.
Well, and something that, that brings up, right, is 76% of people who live within 2 miles of the port are people of color.
Correct.
75% of people who live in that same region are below the median household income. So we're talking about the billions of dollars the port brings in, but not necessarily an equitable sharing of that, right? That
No.
I'm not saying these aren't essential jobs or that these aren't, important jobs, the people who work there, but it's at a cost. It's at a health cost, but it's also just at a daily kind of living cost. Port infrastructure does not make for easily passable sidewalks. Often these are food desert locations. This is, kind of systemic structures. And so as you're talking about these other ports, I'm really curious about, are other ports doing things better? And if so, what can we learn from them? In your visit to LA and other places that you're thinking of, what are ways the port could be a better neighbor to those who are essential to making it work?
Yeah, I mean, to your point of they're making billions, I want to flag how many they're claiming, right? Because Ted Cruz has called the Port of Houston the crown jewel of the Texas economy, right? Because so much, they claim so much money, right? So much of a revenue. They claim $906 billion.
Yeah.
906. That's closer
It's
to
a
a trillion.
Right?
Right? In annual economic value.
Yeah.
And so things that we're talking about, low-hanging fruit, say sidewalks, walkable sidewalks, things that will mitigate the impact on communities in some way, right? Something that's so simple, because at least now they're going to be able to walk to the park if they want to,
Right.
if there's a park nearby, right? And so some of that should be reflected in these communities, because the impact is being punted onto these communities. That's the problem, right? That the health impacts are so big, and when cost-benefit analysis are made, those costs, again, they're just being placed on the community.
Right.
They're not being bared by the port at all. And so it's really frustrating whenever we talk to them, because they never claim responsibility for the pollution that comes from the ship channel, and yet they're claiming all of that money that comes from the ship channel.
Right.
So something's got to give, right? At least a little bit. Put some crumbs into the community so that people can breathe a little easier, literally breathe a little easier.
Right.
And so one of the things that we're asking for in this process is clarity. Because when we talk about dredge spoils, we're talking about dredge spoils, again, in the Houston Ship Channel, where we know there's heavy industry, oil and gas capital. We have the largest petrochemical industrial complex in the entire country.
One of the largest in the world. I mean,
Right.
it's really incredibly vast.
Correct.
Exactly. And we know the impact of breathing the toxic chemicals that come out of these plastic facilities. And so we want some respect when it comes to the facts.
Right.
In May, Shell was on fire for 4 days. And when that fire was put out, all that material, all that toxic sediment was washed away into the ship channel. So talking to any normal person, any average person who doesn't have a high-level background in engineering or science or what have you, will understand 1 + 1 + 1 = 2, right?
Yeah.
If you have all these chemicals being washed into the channel on a regular basis, and you have industry that is not complying to the law,
Yeah, we haven't even
what's
touched
the
that part.
result, right? What's the result? It's going to be toxic.
Well, I want to go into a question here,
Yeah.
and not to bring everything back to disasters and flooding, but something that really worries me is when I hear expansion, right? I jump to Mr. Go, which, for those who don't know, is this Louisiana channel that was designed to kind of reinvigorate the port of New Orleans and wound up turning into a hurricane highway. And it's one of the things we directly attribute Katrina's effect and storm surge to. And I'm really curious about if you know anything about what are we thinking about storm surge effects as we continue to expand the port. I've got Jim Blackburn in the back of my head from the Speed Center who has a really terrifying presentation. He'll be on the show some weeks down the road, but just about what the actual impacts of a bad storm hitting the ship channel are. And I mean, pretty much across the board, there's infinite stories that'll talk to us about this would be the most cataclysmic environmental catastrophe in U.S. history, arguably world history, if a bad storm were to flood out Petrochemical Alley here in Houston. And so, as we're talking about flooding, as we're thinking about former floods, what are we thinking around flooding with this expansion? Is there any real mitigation going on? Are there efforts to protect these in areas? Because you're already talking about existing spills. What happens if we have a bad storm come up that kind of highway?
Yeah, and just listening to you say that, I mean, it's not as if we're not aware, and it is in the back of our minds. We're just wondering, is it in the back of the port engineer and port director's minds? Because as far as I'm concerned, there is nothing in place, and so that is very concerning. Back when Harvey happened, Magellan spilled. I mean, what they reported, what actually happened, is probably more than 500,000 gallons of gasoline into the floodwaters. And so not only did you have Galena Park residents like my colleague Juan Flores, who were trapped in their homes because of the flood, but now they were also trapped with the smells. And so it was so overpowering, and families were throwing up. I mean, it was unbearable to be in that space. And again, nothing has been done after that. You would think that after, the Harvey floods and after the chemical spills and the ITC fires that happened, for almost a week, and the West Side got a, pun intended, whiff of what we go through on a consistent basis, that, some bills would be presented and hopefully passed to help us rein in a lot of these issues. And unfortunately, that's not the case. We continue to get our state representation thinking that industry and the port can keep continuing as they have with no worries whatsoever, which worries us even more, to your point. There's a lot of things that, the port is also delving into, like hydrogen hubs. And they're also, they don't have. I mean, this is new technology. It's not the answer to what we're looking for. It's a highly explosive gas. Again, just adding more layers to an already very burdened community and the issues that we're discussing here that are not being resolved. And so, no, as far as we're concerned, there are no plans. I just really think that they feel they'll deal with it if and when it happens.
But it's not really a matter of if.
Right.
It's a matter of when.
When.
Yeah.
Right. But they'll tell you, if it happens.
Harris County has one of the highest rates of natural disasters in the entire country.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of our location, right? Where we are in the Gulf, but also all the climate changes definitely just kind of come up our alley.
Right.
And so it really is a disaster brewing. Because if a bad storm does hit, and all these facilities are sort of lined up one after the other, it's just kind of like a domino effect on them. If one of them blows up, it can just, start a fire that can just trickle down.
Right.
And then the other thing is, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the air monitors are turned off.
Oh, yeah.
Right before
A storm.
And so if during a storm there's a big explosion or there's a big spill or there's something
Chemical release.
which usually there are higher number of releases right before a storm and during a storm, that's already a fact,
Right.
and now there's no monitoring that's going to tell you, oh hey, maybe shelter in place or maybe evacuate or maybe do something right. to save.
But then think about it. If you're stuck like my colleague Juan was in his home because it's flooded and there is a shelter in place and
Where do you go?
Yeah, you're being flooded by chemicals. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I have to take a 2-second break here just to quickly remind folks that KPFT Houston is currently holding our October Fund Drive. As public radio, KPFT Houston can only exist with your support. Over 90% of our funding comes from listeners like you. If you're enjoying Gulf Streams and want to support our work, please call 713-526-KPFT and pledge a donation. You can make a one-time donation or become a monthly subscriber to support our work. In the coming weeks, Gulf Streams is going to feature conversations with local advocates about a range of things, including sustainability officers and new green jobs. We'll meet with leaders in the field. City officials will be on to talk about the future of development and planning in the city, as well as the future of transportation in the city. We'll talk with Pulitzer Prize finalist Elizabeth Rush all about her new book, The Quickening, Creation, and Community at the Ends of the Earth. And if you pledge $100 or more to Gulf Streams, we'll automatically enter you in a raffle for a signed copy of The Quickening by Elizabeth Rush. Additionally, if you want to become a station sustainer, ask about our memory bricks, permanent inscribed tributes to your generosity here at the studio. And during our entire pledge drive, for every $1,000 donated to KPFT Houston, we'll be donating a parka to the Houston Center for Independent Living. Call 713-526-KPFT to learn about all the unique pledge drive offerings going on this month. I am really delighted to keep bringing you these important conversations about environmental and climate issues here in Houston and beyond on Gulf Streams, and we can only do that with your support. So please call 713-526-KPFT, make a one-time or subscriber donation, mention Gulf Streams, and help us keep ad-free public radio on the air here in Houston. Okay. All right. So sorry, we're back.
No worries.
And I want to get back into some of these local impacts, but also some possibilities of what the port could be doing. Allyn, I know One Breath just put out a piece. Maybe it's a good time to turn to you as well about talking about the Inflation Reduction Act specifically has funds for port futures and for decarbonizing ports, for making ports greener. What are things we can be learning and doing and proactively getting engaged around that the city can be doing to make our port better for everyone?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, there are infinite people who could speak to this much better than I, who are part of the Healthy Port Communities Coalition, who are on, the monthly meetings with Port Houston leadership every month. Broadly, we could say that the Port of Houston is reluctant, perhaps, to enter the future. They, as you mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act grants. There's money in the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and there is a lot of money available. One problem, though, is that it's not enough, and it's being fought over from lots of different ports. And so right now, the Port of Houston, I think, has, and Leticia or Erandi, if you know, I think, correct me, but I think they have exactly one piece of fully electric equipment, and it's a dredge truck. And so
one piece?
One. And they're very proud of it.
Exactly
Yes.
one. They're very proud of that little truck. And so, and well, they should be. Well, they should be.
Well, but
you
with
know, when you compare,
906
the Port
billion.
of
You see,
LA,
the problem with radio is
Right.
people can't see that I'm just kind of momentarily frozen here.
Which is why I'm laughing. I think sometimes people think that we make this stuff up. We were in DC a couple of weeks ago talking to some other, not to go off on
No.
that, but we say these things and that's exactly their facial expression. Like, what? And so again, this is why, I mean, we literally have to point to news articles and other journalists that are elevating these issues, because I genuinely feel people don't believe us. The port loves to sing their own praises. And, to go into your question regarding the IRA funds, a lot of what is being pushed right now is the carbon capture, which I don't want to go too much into the weeds, because the truth is, as I mentioned, being transparent here, science is not my background. I know enough to be able to talk to community about it and have community be engaged with it. But carbon capture is being sold as the solution for everything in regards to climate change and cleaner air and all the things possible. But I'm just not thoroughly convinced that you can safely, securely, successfully capture this gas, stuff it into the ground, pray that it doesn't leak or explode. Oh, let me also remind everyone that it has to be transported through our communities, I'm sure, and then put in our backyards, basically. And I mean, how many times can we do this and basically try to cheat Mother Nature into thinking, oh, well, let's take it from the sky and stuff it in the ground and see what happens, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if it's going to leak. We don't know if it can explode. We don't know how long it'll last in the ground. And so again, they're looking to our region to do all the things. And so I'm just, it makes me very nervous. And, quite frankly, I'm, thinking about moving once these things do get started, because I don't see that how adding more layers to the things that we're discussing here today is really bringing real, true mitigation solutions and safety towards community.
Yeah, in terms of mitigation, for Project 11, two of the things that we've asked for is for the dredge spoil material, test it, because the material, again, is going straight into communities.
Yeah.
For some people, literally right across the street. And so because we don't know and we assume it's toxic because of what we see and what we know is in the channel, but we don't want reassurance just by words. We want to see the results. Show us, test it. Some of the results they're relying on are 40-year-old results.
So is new testing happening?
Not right now.
Not that we know
No,
of.
that's something that we're pushing for.
Right.
We have to really fight for something such as testing.
Right.
That in itself is a fight. And so that is one of them. Test it. And if it comes out that it's toxic, please don't put it in people's
backyards.
Backyards. Yeah. Please don't put it in their communities where when flooding happens, now that toxic material, now we're talking about toxic flooding. That's a whole other issue. So please don't put it in people's communities. Move it somewhere else. Move it off the coast, even though it's going to be expensive. Or I'm sure it's not going to be cheap, but again, they are making a lot of money. So please mitigate the impact on communities. And secondly, use clean dredging equipment, because then we're talking about less emissions on communities that already have a really high level of environmental stressors. I'm talking about some of the top 5%, 0.1% of the most affected in the entire country. Yeah, it's that bad right here in Houston, and people don't realize that.
Right.
But this is true, and one of the communities that has a dredge spoil in it is 0.1 on the 0.1 percentile.
Right.
And so those are a couple of things that we're asking for. They're not the biggest pie in the sky asks, but it's something that will at least help relieve some stressors on communities.
So we're coming to the end of our time. So I want to give us a moment to, particularly because you're so connected to these communities, because you're so on the ground with these groups, what are things people in Houston can do to advocate for a better, fairer, healthier port? What are ways people can get involved around this issue, and what should we be doing?
Glad you asked. So first and foremost, I would say make sure that you sign up to our newsletter, airalliancehouston.org. And then more importantly, I know community usually hears go vote. Well, that's not enough. We need you to get involved in, we're nonpartisan, a nonprofit organization. I have to, disclose that obviously. But you can, get involved with a certain candidate that you see is talking about these exact issues, and block walk for them, phone bank for them, and not just show up to click for them, but bring your friends, your neighbors, your family, make a day out of it. Because at the end of the day, I know we hear this all the time, but votes and elections do matter. You know, we have 12 port commissioners that also get to decide on these issues. And so every 2 years, their terms expire. And we're also trying to get community members on those seats. And those seats, those members are appointed by the mayor and city council and the county. So, you know, again, who you put in these elections and in these seats on the local level have a huge ripple effect on all of the other decision making that impacts what we're discussing here today. So, you know, sign up to our newsletters, show up to some of the town hall meetings, even if you don't live in the community. Trust and believe that it is going to bleed into yours, and sooner than probably than later, and have your voice heard as well. I'm happy to be on this radio show today because I feel that I'm not saying that the community that we serve doesn't listen to you guys, but I feel like you guys serve maybe a different demographic, and that's really what we need here is different voices. You know, the truth is that Air Alliance Houston didn't get involved with the whole anti-idling ordinance because our community spoke up. It was really the West Side and the museum district that were having issues with the school buses that were idling, and that's how we were able to push the anti-idling ordinance, because a lot of moms from the West Side showed up to city council and we pushed it, and it was passed. That's not to say that, you know, we can't do the same, but unfortunately our community doesn't have that same clout and that same power to be able to get these types of things done. So thank you for having us on, Weston. And if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, Leticia at airalliancehouston.org, and we can definitely continue the conversation.
No, I just want to highlight that that's a recurring topic that we have coming up, is the way that these issues are connected and related throughout all of the city, and that what impacts one neighborhood is absolutely affecting other neighborhoods, even if we don't see it every day, especially when we think of the way material moves across town. So I really appreciate that and the many ways to get involved. Leticia, Erandi, Allyn, thank you so much for joining. I've really learned a tremendous amount to this conversation, and I'm so glad to have had you join and to have been able to spotlight this a little bit. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Allyn. So we'll continue now with one of our ongoing weekly stories. Sienna Yen, one of our researchers, is continuing her series on urban planning and development around Houston. And so we'll go now to Sienna with a conversation on an upcoming development in Houston and what it means for Houston culture and building habits in the city.
Welcome to the second episode of Paving the Path to Walkable Communities, where we will explore the transformative world of walkable neighborhoods in Houston. Today, we're going to delve deeper into the development that's redefining the landscape of the East End and historic Second Ward. Known as the Plant in Second Ward, this project is an ambitious initiative aimed at creating a vibrant, walkable community in the heart of Houston. This week, I am joined by two representatives from Concept Neighborhood, the Houston real estate firm behind this transformative project.
So thank you so much for joining me for an interview today. So can you guys both briefly introduce yourselves and your roles at Concept Neighborhood?
Yes, so my name is Andrea Daniela. I actually am a daughter of this neighborhood, Second Ward. I am the marketing director. I also, help with leasing and help with being the community liaison and our events and programming.
I am Jeffrey Kaplan. I'm a co-founder and principal of Concept Neighborhood. My background is really as a social entrepreneur and community developer, focusing on adaptive reuse and historic buildings, and really try to do business that has some sort of measured environmental social impact.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. So can you guys tell us about the inspiration behind the Plant in Second Ward project and what motivated Concept Neighborhood to undertake this initiative?
Great. Well, what motivated Concept Neighborhood to focus on this corridor is that we think that there is a missing component to our city's built environment for an authentic, walkable neighborhood that really celebrates the diversity of Houston, which is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. We're lacking a neighborhood where you can walk and explore and have a spontaneous adventure without driving from place to place. So we want to really, do something that is telling the story of Houston in the most authentic way possible. And we think that there are a lot of young people in our region that really are wanting this sort of walkable neighborhood.
All right. I mean, I know I definitely want to live somewhere like in the future where I can walk to like a grocery store. So I feel like what you're doing is super important. So the concept of a 15-minute neighborhood is like kind of central to this project or central to Concept Neighborhood. Could you kind of explain what this means and why it's like a significant aspect of this development?
Yeah, the vision is to basically create, a small town within the city where all of your basic needs are within a 15-minute walk. So our corridor is the first project to connect a light rail stop, the Plant Second Ward, to the Buffalo Bayou Trail system. So there's a big focus on nature and green space and park equity, and there's a real focus on proximity between where people work and where people live to reduce auto dependency.
The walkability aspect of that seems really great. So going on to like affordability for residents. So we know like affordability is very important for a lot of people. And how is Concept Neighborhood ensuring that this development remains inclusive and affordable for a diverse range of residents?
Well, our master plan calls for a mixed bag of housing that really addresses different, housing types and different income levels. So we're aiming to create what a lot of urban planners and public officials refer to as missing middle income housing or market-based workforce housing. So we're planning to create dignified, high design housing that is, that's taking these sites that probably would have been traditionally front loader townhome sites, which sort of kill the walkable urbanism, and we're clustering through the corridor in the neighborhood smaller projects and managing it as a neighborhood. But we're focusing on courtyard style apartments that are much more affordable than the typical fancy Class A apartment. From a retail standpoint, we're really taking a very different approach to our merchandising.
I think Little Red Box is the perfect example of a business that is doing a great job at having pricing that fits everyone's needs and fits the needs of all types of people and income levels. And they actually accept EBT, they accept food stamps. So I do want to note that 80% of businesses here in the neighborhood are Latino-led, also from the neighborhood, and also women-led.
Wow, that's really awesome. I feel like looking into Concept Neighborhood online, like you can't find that type of information. So that's really like interesting to hear about. Jeff, you mentioned that you have done work with adaptive reuse. I also read online it plays like a role in the Plant Second Ward development. So can you elaborate on this concept and how it's integrated into the project's design and vision?
I think part of what a lot of merchants, especially creative entrepreneurs, are looking for in Houston are authentic old buildings. There's a scarcity of them because we've done such a good job of tearing down old buildings in Houston.
And to that point, I think these historic buildings tell the history of Second Ward and the East End in general, of it being an industrial hub. So we're very excited to be able to tell that story and pay respect to that history through the architecture of these buildings.
And part of the strategy is to sort of save these buildings and to build density around them and instead of in spite of these old buildings. People want to live near a place that feels authentic. So our first phase is restoring all of these historic buildings with really, really interesting creative uses.
Okay, so you mentioned the phases, like you had your first phase. What are the next phases to come, and like what is the anticipated timeline for these projects?
Yeah, well, it's a 10-year project. We're in phase one right now. We've completed the plant at 3401 Harrisburg, where Little Red Box and Street to Kitchen's opening, and Eden Plant Store, and several other really special tenants. And that's sort of the gateway. And then the next phase is WKM campus, which is 13 buildings. And we're working on sort of a maker retail mall, a marketplace hall, which we're calling an anti-mall. And that's going to be the next 2 years. So the place is vibrant and there's people walking around, then we're going to build housing. And what we're going to do is we're going to take these locations that are smaller sites, like 5,000, 10,000 square foot sites, 20,000 square foot sites, where you may have seen 8 townhomes. And what we're going to do is we're going to create these sort of courtyard models for density, for studio apartments.
This all sounds really great, and I also want to kind of touch on the environmental aspects of what you guys are doing at the plant in Second Ward.
This is the challenge of our time. And I think a lot of people that are looking at data have realized that the impact from investing in walkable neighborhoods is, in terms of carbon, is so much greater than almost anything else. Because when you're building a LEED building or a sustainable building in the exurbs, the amount of infrastructure, the public infrastructure investment that's required to get people there, in terms of the automobile, is just so inefficient. So creating a walkable neighborhood has more impact on the environment and on reducing carbon than so many other things. So and I think we really do want people to understand that there's that this bigger environmental impact to what we're doing, especially in Houston.
This project is going to be a template for a new way that developers can do their project. And I do think that there's a better way to do it that speaks to the community, that respects the culture of that community, and that also respects the history of that community.
And we would invite anyone who's curious about what we're doing, that wants to get involved, that has interest in hearing the details of our plan and our investment thesis, to reach out to us and ask questions, because we want to share what we're doing, and we want Houston to know that this is important work.
Right. So is there anything that people can do to become more involved with this project and development?
So, with the programming that we have here, it's really important that we invite the community out to come check this neighborhood out. And we started this initiative to have a monthly block party that celebrates the past, present, and future of Second Ward, second Saturday in Second Ward. We have performers, we have local artists, we have nonprofits that come out, we have vendors. So we invite everyone to come out in what we consider to be, the coolest and most connected neighborhood in Houston. So we're very excited.
This all sounds incredibly exciting, and I certainly look forward to the second Saturday block parties every month and to witnessing the transformation of the plant in Second Ward in the upcoming years. Thank you guys so much for sharing your valuable insights and vision with our audience, and it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
So that concludes our insightful discussion with the representatives from Concept Neighborhood. Again, thank you to Jeff and Andrea for joining me today. Stay tuned for more episodes of Paving the Path to Walkable Communities. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great and wonderful day.
And now we'll go over to our researcher, Jaden, who's going to tell us about ways you can get involved here around town in Houston this week.
Hey y'all, I hope you're doing well, and here's your weekly update on ways you can get involved in the community this week. Tuesday, October 17th from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., volunteer with SBP, where you'll help rebuild homes that were devastated by natural disasters. Jobs can range from hanging drywall or doors to painting or spackling. If this opportunity excites you, you can sign up on the SPP website, sbpusa.org. Another opportunity that would be very impactful would be to help your local Houston community by packing relief boxes. On Thursday, October 19th from 8 a.m. to noon, join the community and help package food or relief boxes that will be distributed at a later date. You must be 7 years or older to participate. If you're interested in this opportunity, go to volunteerhou.org and click the link for packing relief boxes under Thursday the 19th. And lastly, if you're looking for a way to support the environment in Houston, look no further. Volunteer at the 20th Annual Herman Park Conservancy Run in the Park. You can help by directing runners en route or by helping a team set up or take down after the event. This will take place on October 21st, and there will be different shifts ranging from 6 a.m. to noon. You must be 13 years or older to volunteer. If you'd like to participate and support this conservation effort, go to volunteerhou.org and look for Volunteer for Herman Park 20th Annual Run under October 21st. Hopefully some of these opportunities will excite you and motivate you to go volunteer in the Houston community this week.
Thanks, Jaden. I'd like to point out that Jaden and Sienna, our two researchers, are both undergraduate students at Rice and are learning how to handle and think about these different environmental issues and also how to communicate those broadly. And that's really one of the big educational goals of this program, as well as to create opportunities for young people to learn about not only the environment, but also how to talk about it. So I just want to say, in addition to their outstanding work so far, a big thank you to Jaden and Sienna for just jumping in and I'm really immediately doing great work thinking about these issues and working as researchers and coming up with these stories. Up next time here on Gulf Streams, we have Rice Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Dan Cohan, who's going to join to talk about his recent book, Confronting Climate Gridlock, as well as concerns about the Houston grid and the future of energy in the city. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081. That's 713-348-4081, or email me at westont@rice.edu. KPFT is in our October fund drive. To support more programming like this, please call 713-526-KPFT, 713-526-KPFT, press 1 for donations, and mention Gulf Streams when you pledge to help keep our work going. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski, co-produced by Joseph Campana, audio engineer Rico Enriquez, research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce and Sienna Yen. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards here on KPFT Houston.
Thank you, Dr. Twardowski, for what you do here. You've brought a ray of sunshine on Monday afternoons at noon to talk about something very important, our environment, and what's going on with our environment, which is all kinds of things, and none of them very good right now. Folks, KPFT is supposed to be about education in part, and this program is highly educational. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you will support it in Dr. Twardowski's efforts. Rice University graciously helps to bear the cost of this program, and I want to thank them. But we need to thank you, too. So give us a call, 713-526-5738, option 1, or kpft.org, and do your part, just your part. Join us at $5 a month or $10 a month. Whatever it is you feel to be your part, do that. Let us see that donation come in. You're asking for news and informational programs? Well, here's one of them, and it's done oh so well. Thank you for what you do, sir.
Thanks, Andy.